This is the Pixel 10 Pro XL, and 7 months later, I think the weird thing about this phone is that most people won't see much of a difference at first, but does that mean there really isn't one? What's up, friends? I'm Brian McDuff, aka BMac, and welcome to another video. And today we're going to be discussing the Google Pixel 10 Pro XL, and after 7 months of use, I do get why people don't see much of a difference with it at first. First things first, I do need to give a huge thank you and a shout out to Google for sending out a Pixel 10 Pro XL gift from Google for me to be able to check out, so Google, thank you. But with that having been said, let's get things started here talking about the design of the Pixel 10 Pro XL, and if it looks this familiar, where the upgrades might actually be hiding. On the surface, the Pixel 10 Pro XL and base Pixel 10 Pro do look very similar to their predecessors. It has the same flat edge design with a full width camera bar protruding from the matte back. Although notably the Google logo is a little darker and a little bigger now. The millimeter wave antenna is now hidden on the top of the device, but you do still get the polished aluminum frame and the Gorilla Glass Victus 2 on the front and back. Buttons remain the same with a volume rocker and a power button on the right side, with stereo speakers on the top and bottom that I personally think sound great, and a USB-C, USB 3.2 port on the bottom, but this time with no SIM card slot here in the US, since the Pixel 10 Pro series is now dual eSIM only in this country. And then capping all that off is once again an IP68 dust and water resistance rating with submersion protection up to 1.5 meters for up to 30 minutes. The fingerprint scanner is once again an under-display ultrasonic fingerprint scanner that is still one of the quickest and most reliable that I've used on an Android device. So as you can see, a lot of the same this year, to the point where there's not a whole heck of a lot to comment on with the Pixel 10 Pro series design, although I will point out that this phone is a little bit heavier than last year's model, despite being the exact same dimensions and same thickness as last year's. So we're looking at around 207 grams for the weight of the Pixel 10 Pro, or 232 grams for the Pixel 10 Pro XL, a marginal uptick in weight that you really can't even feel in your hand. For color options though, a little different this year, with Moonstone, Jade, Porcelain, and Obsidian as color options. And I like the color choices. I seem to always like the Pixel color choices, but I still do love the Obsidian color here on the Pixel 10 Pro series. However, if you were loving that pink rose quartz color from the Pixel 9 Pro series, I could understand why you'd be a little bit bummed to no longer see that as an option in this year's lineup. So if you're looking at the Pixel 10 Pro series and thinking it really doesn't seem all that upgraded from the outside, I get it, which is why the bigger question is probably whether or not the real changes here are hiding somewhere else beyond what design alone is showing you. So if there are only minor differences on the outside of the Pixel 10 Pro series that you might not even notice at all, what about the display? Is the display on this device one of the few places where you could actually see or feel a difference? At first glance, there is once again a lot of the same this year with the display compared to last year's model. The Pixel 10 Pro XL features a 6.8-inch LTPO OLED 1 to 120 Hz HDR10+ always on display, while the base Pixel 10 Pro device features the same at 6.3 inches. Once again, with a pixel density rating of 486 pixels for the 10 Pro XL and 495 pixels for the 10 Pro. Those are the exact same pixel density ratings we had as last year, and more than enough resolution for you to not actually see individual pixels. But what could be considered a pretty major upgrade this year that you may not see, even if not consciously, is the ability to actually change the pulse width modulation, or PWM rating, up from 240 Hz to around 480 Hz, but you will have to enable that in the adjust brightness for sensitive eyes setting buried within the phone's accessibility settings. I'm not typically prone to eye strain or headaches when using displays, but as is usually the case, I figure that this is a feature when I turn it on that could only help me, not hurt me, so I immediately turned it on. We do also have a slight bump in brightness capabilities here on the Pixel 10 Pro series, with the ability to actually get up to 3300 nits of peak brightness or 2200 nits in high brightness mode. So those aren't exactly the kind of display upgrades that most people are gonna notice within 5 seconds of looking at the display, but if you do look at your phone for multiple hours per day, those two things might actually be some of the changes you start to feel before you could even explain why. Which I'm okay with, because I think on this device the display looks great, it gets bright enough for my needs in pretty much any situation, and it doesn't really leave me wanting a whole heck of a lot more. But with that having been said, if design and display aren't showing so much, do the cameras on the Pixel 10 Pro series finally start to reveal where the upgrade actually is. The Pixel 10 Pro series once again does feature 3 rear-facing cameras and a selfie camera with specs that, yes, are identical to last year's Pixel 9 Pro series, meaning you do get a main 50 megapixel f1.7 wide-angle lens with OIS, a 48 megapixel f2.8 periscope telephoto lens with OIS at 5x optical zoom, and a 48 megapixel f1.7 ultra-wide lens, plus that 42 megapixel f2.2 selfie lens with autofocus on the front. In terms of video, you are getting native video capabilities up to 4K 60 frames per second, or 1080p 240 frames per second slow motion, plus support for 10-bit HDR video recording. But even though those camera specs are identical to last year's Pixel generation on paper, there are some performance upgrades within the Pixel 10 Pro series that take the image and video signal processing further than it's ever been before. Powered by the Tensor G5 chipset that we'll talk about more in just a moment, the Pixel 10 Pro series now does feature a video boost improvement, providing AI-powered video upscaling up to 8K 30 frames per second and now also 24 frames per second, while also expanding night sight video to the ultra-wide camera and across any range up to 20x, whereas it was only available on the main and tele lenses on the 9 Pro series. Plus, you are also getting AI-based tone mapping and better stabilization for your handheld footage. The big processing upgrade this year, however, that you're probably gonna notice more than anything else, has to be ProRes Zoom, which is pretty cool. It's going to unlock zoom past 30x all the way up to 100x, where 31x and up is gonna be powered by AI generative models to reimagine the captures and add details like texture to trees, buildings, or landscapes that the sensor can no longer physically see. The result is pretty awesome. It's basically just using AI to fill in the gaps, but it happens all at the touch of a button on your device. And in most cases, I think it's actually gonna result in much more usable photos than it otherwise would. Sometimes it could be a little obvious, like on text or street signs, but for most other times it nails it, such as on trees or buildings, or even on wildlife. And the cool thing is that the Pixel 10 Pro series will actually save both versions for you, so you're not just locked into ProRes Zoom, and you can compare the results and pick whichever one you like more, but I do think you're gonna probably like the ProRes Zoom result that much better. Ideally, we'd eventually see video boost taking place on device, even though I know how much more processing power that will take, which is why it still happens in Google's cloud servers. But if I do wanna fully embrace video boost as part of my workflow and rely on it for any kind of content creation, I'm gonna need it to be faster and more upfront about how long it's actually gonna take. So what I think stands out more than the hardware here is probably how quickly you can start trusting the output across the lenses and zoom ranges in any kind of shooting scenario. So even if the camera hardware is literally unchanged on paper, I do think this is one of the categories where you'll start to feel like the differences that are being made here, even if you can't see them, actually are showing up in the results. But speaking of the Pixel 10 Pro series performance, are the biggest changes happening in the places you only notice when your phone doesn't fail you? That is what we need to discuss. Like I mentioned a moment ago, the Pixel 10 Pro series does now have the Google Tensor G5 chipset, which is now based on Google's own in-house 3nm process. What this means is that the Tensor chip is no longer designed with Samsung based on Exynos chips now, and is now manufactured by TSMC. I do not think it could be understated how important the G5 is, not just for the Pixel 10 Pro series, but for the Pixel Pro series moving forward. It is absolutely in large part what's powering the AI features on this device, like the camera features we just talked about, and the additional features we're about to break down. But in addition to the Tensor G5, we are also getting the same 16 gigs of RAM across the 128, 256, 512, and 1 terabyte storage configuration options. But do keep in mind, there is no 128 gig storage option for specifically the Pixel 10 Pro XL this year. But something else to point out here is a pretty key difference, the jump now to UFS 4.0 memory, which can be considered significantly better than the UFS 3.1 memory that we had in last year's model, unless you do go with that 128 gig Pixel 10 Pro option, which is the lone device across this entire lineup that is still using UFS 3.1, which basically is probably yet another reason not to go for the 128 gig option, even in the Pixel 10 Pro. Just go for 256 gigs. I think you're gonna be happier with that on multiple fronts. We are also getting an upgrade to Bluetooth 6.0. We are also getting the return of a vapor chamber in the Pixel 10 Pro series. And while the benchmarks that I've conducted do show some clear gains over the Pixel 9 Pro series, I think what matters more here is that those improvements seem to hold up in the features and sustained behavior that you notice when you actually start to live with this device. Features like Camera Coach that helps you in real time take better photos, to Magic Q, which is a built-in tool that contextually pops up with information and replies across your apps right when you need it. There are a lot of behind-the-scenes upgrades here, with AI in particular, that is making the performance section a little hard to ignore, and where you probably actually start to notice most of the differences. But we already know all of this is only as good as the battery life on this device. So do these efficiency gains really show up in a way that changes how dependable this phone feels day to day? Despite the Pixel 10 Pro series remaining the same dimensions and thickness as the Pixel 9 Pro series, we do actually get a slightly upgraded battery size in both devices this year, a 5200 mAh battery in the Pixel 10 Pro XL, and a 4870 mAh battery in the Pixel 10 Pro. My own experiences do point to slightly better battery life here, even if it's not the kind of change that completely reshapes how I use the device day to day. Which, when you think about it, makes sense. The battery might be slightly larger and the processor more efficient, but we also do have more going on behind the scenes using that battery and that processor power, which does somewhat offset the battery gains. Still, however, at the end of the day, I will say with slightly better battery life overall. And to me, that's probably the most interesting pattern with this device. Not dramatic changes, but a lot of small little upgrades that may hold up a little better when you lean on it. But even still, the bigger changes this year probably do have to do with charging, whereby we can now charge the Pixel 10 Pro XL at 45 watts wired, delivering up to a 70% charge in just 30 minutes, or at 30 watts of charging for the regular Pixel 10 Pro, delivering up to a 55% charge in just 30 minutes, or wireless Qi 2.2 magnetic charging branded as Pixel Snap at 15 watts for the Pixel 10 Pro, or up to 25 watts with the Pixel 10 Pro XL. This is another one of those additions that may not sound huge on paper, but in day-to-day use, this makes charging and accessory use with the Pixel 10 Pro series feel noticeably easier. And that's what makes my conclusion on this device, I think, that much more interesting than what the outside of the phone suggests. So after 7 months of use, the Pixel 10 Pro XL really might not look that different on the surface, but are the upgrades you can't see actually the ones that end up mattering the most? The simple answer, yes. I really do think the upgrades that you cannot see are the ones that matter the most here. The more you live with the Pixel 10 Pro XL or the Pixel 10 Pro, the more those better thermals, stronger sustained performance, smarter processing, better charging, and just overall day-to-day dependability reveal why this experience feels more convincing than it first appears. I get it, the design is familiar, the display is only subtly better, and the cameras look almost the same on paper, but the results, their performance, and the day-to-day reliability all start to feel stronger here the longer you use it. So in other words, the Pixel 10 Pro series is not a phone that earns your trust through massive, drastic changes. It earns it through how it holds up day to day, and how it holds up day to day more than it ever has before. So bottom line, this Pixel 10 Pro series device doesn't feel like a phone that earns your trust through dramatic changes, but I think it earns it through how it holds up day to day and does so better than it ever has before. As always, for the latest deals, prices, promos, and information for the Pixel 10 Pro series, you can of course always head to my affiliate link, bmac.link/Pixel10 Of course, as always, there will be clickable links in the video description box and in the comment section below, so check those out. But with that having been said, the only thing I wish this phone could do is edit my videos and upload them for me. Arguably, it actually gets pretty close, I will say. But I will see you guys in my next video.